My father managed a big sheep state, or actually 3 of them in my childhood, different ones. And so we lived on it was about 3,000 acres, I think, the one that I spent most of my life on. And of course, at least 3,000 sheep, completely surrounded by sheep. Sheep in New Zealand are tightly woven. We usually had 3 shepherds, and each one of those shepherds usually had about 4, at least 4, probably 5 dogs. The dogs came with the shepherds. They couldn't manage without those.
Right.
And my father had 5 or 6.
Were they border collies?
Oh yes. We were allowed to play with the pups until they were a few weeks old, but after that we didn't fool with the dogs. The dogs belonged to the owner. You weren't supposed to mess with them.
Did your father or any of your shepherds compete with the dogs?
Yes, my father did, and I think some of the others had at times, but I did go to the dog trials with my father, yes. Well, we used to like to go out when they were going out to work with the sheep or the cattle. We did have cattle. We always liked to go, if we were allowed to, we liked to get a horse and go. And so we did do that. That was always a fond memory. It all happened in the very early morning, unfortunately. But if we could, quote, help, we always enjoyed that. My older brother was only a bit over a year older than I was, and so we spent a lot of time together. And it was always we always enjoyed that, being able to go out and work on the farm, or go out when the men went to work and work on on a farm like that. You have to be able to do everything. So they used horses. We did no tractors, and so Dad used to be building ponds and roads and all sorts of things with his horses, and so we'd go and sit for hours watching him. It just doesn't sound very exciting, but it can get exciting. Candles. It's a wonder we didn't burn the place down. We had a car. But to do that, you faced, for the first 8 miles, you were going through other farms. So there were 4 creeks that had to be forded. There was no bridges. And 8 gates that had to be opened and closed just to get out to the main road. That was the driveway. So that could be tricky if it rained. They were all flash flood creeks, and so if it rained up in the hills, you went out in the afternoon. When you came back, the creeks could all be up. It was quite exciting at times. My parents made a list for a year, and when they sent the wool, when the lorries came out to get the wool, of course they didn't have anything on them, and so they brought the stores out for a year, and it all went into the storeroom. So they used to make this list. You'd see the 2 of them walking around looking a bit dazed, and then making little notes, and then they'd talk to each other about it, and you'd hear them say, "Oh, well, I don't know how many pounds of flour we better get this year." It came in 100-pound bags. So we had a whole store with shelves and everything in it. But we moved to another place, and that was 15. So we got really quite close to town there, but never close enough to go to school. The New Zealand government in those days, and they probably still do, have a what they call correspondence school, and the education department send out lessons to children that can't get to school. And so as there was 3 of us, it was a bit much for my mother just to, be supervising it all. So we used to, they used to hire people from the university. It was, of course, also the time of the slump. I was born in 1929, and there were a lot of people couldn't get a job, and a lot of people couldn't get food. So to come to a farm and look after 3 or 4 children and supervise their schoolwork was quite an attractive thing for a young person who had just graduated from university. They got fed anyway. They knew they were going to get fed, and that was not always the case.
Parents.
Yeah, we always had men on the road, they were just out walking, carrying their swag. And they would come to the house for food.
I mean, were they hobos?
Oh yeah, I think that's what you called them here. We just call them swaggers.
Swaggers.
Because the things they carried was called a swag. All their belongings, their blankets and pots and pans. And they camped out under the bridges quite often.
Okay. That was a tough time.
It was a tough time.
Did
my father was lucky to have a job. And I think we sort of vaguely knew that, though they never said anything about it. My parents never said anything about it.
Did you ever go hungry?
Oh no. Heavens no, look at me.
What was the most favorite thing that your mother would make, or that you would help your mother make?
Well, she made the bread for the whole place, and that was always fun because you got to punch it, punch it all down again.
Did you make butter?
Yes. Not much fun in butter, it just goes watery. And yes, she made the butter, she made the bread, and all the cooking, of course. And she did teach, she taught my sister and I how to cook. And I suppose it stuck, I'm not sure, I don't like cooking.
I suppose there was no shortage of lamb on the menu.
Oh heavens no, we didn't know whether there was anything, we didn't even know there was any other sort of food. I remember the first time we went to town and had a meal, and there was fish on the menu. We'd never seen it before. When you live on a scattered sort of area like that, and there's a lot of young men, there were a lot of young men who lived around there, of course. They all worked on the farms or they owned a farm or something. They all went to the war. So it was a very sort of happy sort of place where everybody knew everybody. So my memory of the war is mostly farewells for one young man and then towards the end of it bringing them back. And they nearly all came back. So then I worked for a little while, and then I became a midwife. And then I worked some more years, and I can't remember which way around it all goes. At some point in there I decided to go to England, which was what you did, with the great overseas experience. So I went to England, what they called a co-op in London, and they had a place you could go and live there in London, for nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And then people would call in wanting nurses for hospitals or private duty or, people's homes or something like that, and they would send you out to jobs. So I did that for a while, and that was interesting because you get sent all over England, and I opted to go to hospitals rather than homes, I didn't know whether they'd have plumbing.
And you became a midwife.
That was one of the things I did, yes.
So do you remember how many babies you delivered?
No, I used to have it in a book, but I don't know. I was in London doing that, most of that in people's houses, home births. That's what I decided I wanted to do, and we didn't do that in New Zealand. while I was there, I got a job in Spain. So I worked down there for a year.
As a nurse?
Yes, the British American Hospital. Oh, I had a friend from New Zealand who was in London at the time, and she had a friend who came visiting, and apparently the man, can't think of his name, he was with the embassy in the New Zealand embassy, or the British embassy, I think, in Madrid, and apparently they had built this. The British and American embassies had built a hospital in Madrid, and they were having a hard time staffing it. So as soon as he knew that, in fact, my friend was a nurse too, as soon as he knew we were both nurses, he shoved us off down there to Spain. And so we went down there. We didn't realise that that was what he was doing to us, that he was putting us in a position to see this hospital in Hanoi. It was very nice. And so what they then did was offer us jobs there, you see. Well, it was a lot of work, I can tell you, so there wasn't a lot of fun.
Right.
But there was always a crowd around, you know, and there was always all these people who are not living in their own countries, and there was always something to go and see or do, very interesting things. Lots of places to go during the days off, which were few and far between, but and it was interesting because our patients were interesting too. Everybody from all sorts of embassies would come there. So we met people we weren't used to seeing. So I took the job in Spain and saved every penny I could get. I needed $600 to take a bus from this coast to the other coast, and then a ship to New Zealand. That was the cheapest way. I couldn't afford to fly. And somehow or other I'd found out that they were taking exchange students and that they paid you for working here. You did get an allowance as an exchange student. So I came to, and I lived in New York and worked at the Mount Sinai Hospital. Went straight down this coast, down to New Orleans, and then across just above the border, over to San Francisco. And, no, not San Francisco, Los Angeles it would be, wouldn't it?
Or San Diego.
Well, yes, San Diego and then Los Angeles. And then up to San Francisco and caught a boat. It was, yeah, a very slow boat to New Zealand. We stopped at Hawaii, that was the only stop it makes. And the bus drivers were very good to us too. They were always very careful. They were concerned because we'd be getting out looking for motels, you know, in strange cities. And they were always very careful to tell us which way to go and which way they thought would be the safest for us. And they were very nice to us. I went back to New Zealand. My mother was ill, and I went back to New Zealand. And she was in the hospital for a while, and then she did get out of hospital that time. And so my father bought a house in town, so I stayed in there with my mother and worked at the hospital, rode my bike to work. It was cold. Because one of my other foolish things that I did was went to Vietnam in the middle of the war. That's not smart. It was a Vietnamese civilian hospital. Yeah.
So did you treat napalm victims?
We didn't see many of those. I only ever saw one, I think. What we did see, we did have some very nasty burns, but they were caused by kerosene stoves. They cooked with kerosene. A lot of people got burned. But we was working with the Vietnamese. We were supposed to be working with the Vietnamese as, you know, to sort of help them
Did you come into under attack at all, or
No, he never touched us.
so the actual war didn't affect you?
Well, not really. I mean, I was never standing there with people shooting at me.
But I get the impression that the war was definitely.
Just outside the front door. But no, we didn't really have it. They knew we were there, and they'd worked it all out with the Vietnamese ahead of time. But there was a lot of, we had things they wanted, so there was a lot of thievery. The houses were those French houses, and they're all open. They have open verandas sort of all around, so it's very hard to secure them. There's no walls, just mosquito nets, which can be cut. And I suppose a lot of tempting stuff that they couldn't get. I don't know. It's pretty sad. Very sad.
How long were you there for?
Yeah. I decided to go to England again, so I just kept going. I started off and went to Cambodia, slept for about 10 days. It was before there wasn't a war in Cambodia at that time. And then I just went across Europe, like went to Italy, Greece and Italy, across France, to see a friend who was still living in Spain. And I stayed with her for a few days. And then I went up to England and spent some more time there.
But this journey from Vietnam all the way to Spain, you did alone?
Uh-huh. I was flying.
Flying, okay.
I had more money, so you could fly. I was working at the University of Virginia. I did a little nursing there, but just for a few weeks. And when I first started out, I was working as a nursing assistant because I didn't have my license. And I enjoyed that as much as anything I had done for quite a while. And then I came to Culpeper as a supervisor. And then I worked here. And then I was working here, and then I went back to Culpeper as the director of nursing. And then they got a bright idea and started calling us the assistant administrator for nursing service. They didn't give us any more money. But I haven't done any real nursing for many years now. Many years. Because somehow or other, people would take one look at me and say, well, we've been having a problem with so-and-so, and we'd like you to fix that. And so I sort of became a fixer. And I wasn't doing hands-on nursing.
How did you meet Ed Sparks?
Oh, I met him here. I had come to work at Culpeper, and who was here? Somebody. Anyway, there was a girl from over here in Orange who was working over there, and she invited some of us over to the dance in the Legion Hall. Is it New Year's they have a dance? Anyway, I couldn't come that night, but they asked me another night, and we went to the hotel, the President Madison Inn. Used to have a place where they had dances occasionally, and so they had set it up for me to go with Ed. So I guess you'd say it was a blind date, and I met him here.
And did you hit it off immediately?
Well, we got married 5 years later, so it wasn't a sort of, but it was very, very nice.
An extended courtship?
Well, I suppose you'd call it that, yes. but it was a friendship as well. I miss the old boy. We used to have such fun because we both liked to travel, and we'd get in the car and take off, and take off. We went up to Maine one time. We didn't set out for Maine, but that's where we ended up. Beautiful up there.
Yeah.
And did a lot of travelling around and really enjoyed ourselves. We both liked the mountain. We bought a little motorhome. Used to go off in that too. That was good for the mountain. We just go up to the campgrounds there. And after Ed died, there didn't seem to be much going on, so I ended up volunteering at the Arts Centre, at the Visitor Centre, not very often, but at the Visitor Centre, at the bookshop, the library bookshop. I lived by myself at the house in East Main Street for 3 years after Ed died. Rattled around like a pea in a pot. And I had a slight stroke, and it affected the left side of me, my left leg and arm. It's not very bad, but I found that I didn't feel I could safely drive the car. I'd got to the not being able to drive the car because of my eyesight, and then I had the stroke. And when that happened, I decided coming here was probably the answer. And it has been. It's very good here.
Yeah.
It takes a little while to get used to. I didn't like it when I first came.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody does, because they've been taken out of their own home. Great big strange thing has happened to them in their lives. They've sold everything. They've sort of feel like they've lost everything. And it's hard when you first come. Do that. I like it here, and I like Orange. And if I went to New Zealand, I would have had to buy a house and, go through all that again and get it all straightened out and decide where I was going to live, and would have been very sort of bit of a turmoil. So I didn't seriously go into it. And of course I'd been here quite a while by then. I like the United States. So just do whatever interests you, and make sure you can, you don't have to sit back and say, oh, I haven't got enough money, or I never had enough money. But you can still do these things. No, I don't. Just go for it. And if you see an opportunity, take it.